All right, thank you for coming to our session on securing scoped applications. I'm Gregory, and my colleague Guru and Nikhil, and we're going to talk to you today about some ways in which you can make sure that your scoped applications don't interfere with each other. So this is at application and scripting level, so it's not to be confused with anything that's at the standard safe harbor statement. So we're going to talk about two features that we have with scoped applications, one of which, if you've built some scoped applications, you might already be aware of, which is the runtime access tracking. And then we're going to speak about a slightly newer feature called restricted caller access. We'll give a little comparison of the two features, and we'll give a brief demo showing how they work. And after that, we'll have time for some questions. So what you'll get out of this is you'll learn how scoped applications can interact with each other, how you can control what applications have access to another application's artifacts. And you'll learn about the two facilities, as I mentioned, runtime access tracking and caller access. And again, I wanted to reiterate that this is at the script and application level, and so don't confuse this with ACLs, anything that would be at the user level. So we'll start with runtime access tracking, and I'll hand.
So before I go into the what and the hows, let me talk a little bit about the why. So in the platform, ServiceNow platform, you can write applications, interact seamlessly with each other, interact with each other's tables, script includes, and so on. As for example, you can set up a reference field which points to a table in a different application, add a related list, use it in condition builders. It all just works. However, there is flexibility in doing all of these things in script. So there are platform ways of interacting, like I said, related list. But through script, you can do a lot more. But this also gives system administrators a problem with trying to figure out how applications are interacting with each other. So runtime access tracking is a feature which helps communicate the intent of accessing some other application to the system administrators so that they can do something about it. And we'll see what that something is. So what this feature allows you to do is, as an application developer, you can declare that you're accessing tables or script includes or script APIs through script. So this operates in two modes. When you're developing, it's set to tracking mode. So you just go through all your scripts, and records are created which capture what you're accessing. And when you install the application in production mode, the mode is set to enforcing, which means all of these access which have been captured as records, they start being enforced. And the system administrator can toggle whether access should be granted or not, which, as you can see, is captured in the status field of our record, which we'll see in the next slide. So let's look at what access to a record looks like. This is a record I picked from an out-of-box installation. It shows a source scope, the target scope, the application in which you're accessing, in this case, a table, and the operation is read. So this record is in Cisco privilege. Let's look at what access to script include looks like. Very similar, same record. Now the target type is script include. And now I hand it back to Greg to talk about the next feature. And we'll go over, in the demo, these things in action so you get a better idea of how they work.
So those of you familiar with scoped application development, you've probably already seen, as you create tables and script includes, that there was an access field on there, and you could say allowable to all applications, or you could say accessible only by this application. So the point of the restricted caller access feature was to be able to kind of add in another level in there, so that you can now, on tables and script includes, you could say caller restriction, and then we will track access to those tables and script includes, also by creating privilege records. And then those privilege records, the application administrator of the target application can decide whether to allow those or to restrict those. And this way, you can be able to limit what applications can access other applications' tables and script includes. So you don't have to give access to everything. You can give access to just specific applications. If you activate the restricted caller access plugin, on the tables and script includes, we'll add a new caller access field, which defaults to being set to none. And if it's set to none, then the normal restrictions apply. Or it can be set to caller tracking, where you can set your application to caller tracking. You can run through different scenarios of accessing your application, and you can see what other applications are accessing your tables and script includes, and then you can then set those privilege records accordingly. And then generally when it's installed in production, those would be set to caller restriction, in which case, if you don't have a privilege record, that access will be restricted. And all these records are saved in the sys-restricted caller access table, again with similar field states of requested, allowed, and denied. One of the things that restricted caller access gives you is there's multiple types of privilege records which you can put in there. So you can put in a record which allows for broad privileges, saying application A can access anything that's caller restricted in application B. You fully trust application A, and so you can say, yep, it can access anything in application B. Or you can have more specific rules. You can say this particular business rule can access this particular table in the second application, or this particular script include, or this particular UI action.
Greg, we have a question.
I'm sorry? Okay, so the question was about nested script includes. So each script include runs within the scope of the application that it's a part of. So if you're calling, if application in scope A is calling a script include in scope B, during that running through that script include, that should be running within that application scope. So I don't believe that we will accidentally allow for a transitive access, if that's what you're worried about. When the script include function is from app B is running, I believe it is running within the context of application B. So, yes. Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah, so the privilege records need to be on the actual calling scope that's calling it. So if you have script include A, calling script include B, calling script include C, eventually calling into your script include, then application C would have to have the access record, because that's the context it would be running in. Well, it's however you set up your privilege record, right? You can set up your privilege record from either the original calling scope, in which case you're right, you won't then, by the time you get down to the nested level, then that scope may not have access, or you can set it at the lower level if you know that will need access. So the question is when was this feature introduced? The restricted caller access feature is in there in Kingston. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So oh, yeah.
Thank you. Is it so? My question was, I'm managing my scoped applications right now. I'm in Jakarta, so there I'm not allowing scoped application. I'm not exposing to the rest of the world, but I'm creating an interface form of the include script, which is exposed to the whole world. And then if somebody has to interact with my scoped application, they need to call this include script, and internally this include script will gather the things, return back, or do some operations. Now, any changes within my scope applications, others were not getting affected because of that, because I always keep my include script. So it was a clear interface which I was maintaining. But now when we are walking down this road, so I just cleaned up the mess and started walking that path, and and we are doing the same thing again. Now because it creates a dependency.
Yes.
What's the direction from ServiceNow on that?
All right, so the question is really about that, you know, if you're building an application, you want to make sure you have a clean interface such that any changes to that application don't affect any other applications which might be using it. So that would still be a best practice to continue. Part of the reason why this feature exists is because there are times where there's two applications which are pretty closely related, and this way we can make sure that those applications can access the data and script APIs required without opening it up to every other application on the system. But you are correct in that you would still want to follow best practices of making sure to try to isolate a proper interface to your application so that you're not then exposing anybody who might be calling your application to any changes internally that you're making. So that's a good point to make. Another thing to note is that on these privilege records, if the target application has application administration turned on, then it needs to be the application administrator who can then, you know, set these records from either allowed to denied or denied to allowed. So it won't be the system admin in that case. If application administration is not turned on in the target application, then it would be the system admin. So here's just a little table showing the differences between these two functionalities. runtime access tracking, the intent is just to express the intent of what application artifacts are going to be accessed by a particular application. So it's really from the source application's point of view. And the access control is always just at the scope level. And during runtime, the privilege records are always administered by the system administrator. Whereas in the restricted caller access, it's from the target application's point of view. We have the ability to have finer-grained access control than just scope A to scope B. As I mentioned, you can do particular script includes and business rules, et cetera. And at runtime, if application administration is on the target application, then it's the application administrator who can then modify those records. So now we're going to walk through a couple of demo scenarios, just showing how these work and what the privilege records look like.
Okay, so this first demo is to illustrate how runtime access tracking works. What I have here is two different applications. The first one has a table called inventory. It just has a bunch of different products and there's a count in different stores. And essentially, it's keeping track of inventory of types of products. My second application product has this table where I'm listing different products available. So I want to make use of the data in the inventory application and show it here. So the way I have done it is a little bit contrived, but bear with me. So what is shown here is data which is queried from this table here. So the way I have done it is I have a client script which makes an AJAX call, which is the script include, and it queries the inventory table here, just to get a simple glide aggregate call. Now, because this is through script, a privilege record is created when you're developing. And when you bundle the privilege record with your application, it goes in or gets installed with the status of requested. So these are the three choices you had seen in the slide. And this is the application page for product management. So because this is allowed, this query, everything just works. Now let's see what happens if I change this to denied. And this is what a system administrator might do. I'll just go back here and say something like this. So I get this error notification saying that access was denied. And I can handle some of this in script, like I have handled it here. So it shows up as availability is unable to check. This is the part which is controlled by the application. This is the notification is what is provided by the platform. So just to go through this again, when you build your application, you would go through this runtime access tracking, being in tracking mode. This is an installed application, so it's set to enforced. You would also bundle the privilege records, which, if I can get to, there we go. Let's look at the record itself. The target is the inventory table. It's a type of target type is table. Operation is read. We can refine this for different operations, but all that is required for the purposes of this demo is read. All right, I'll hand it over to Nikhil to demonstrate restricted caller access.
Go ahead.
Sure.
He asked to show the
attributes
attributes
of
on
the
that on the other application.
So the other application, because runtime access tracking is really from the point of view of the caller, it really doesn't have anything special. It has runtime access tracking also set to enforcing, but it's not accessing anything else, so it really doesn't matter. And as you can see, there are no privileged records. RCA, on the other hand, as you will see next, the target of your access is what has to have privileged records. Let's see. For runtime access track, the question was who should have the privileged record, the target or the source? For runtime access tracking, it's the source which needs to have the privileged record. Because this is geared towards the administrator, system administrator, to control the interaction between the application. While RCA allows, RCA being restricted caller access, allows applications more control over who can and who cannot access.
All right, so we're going to see a demo on the restricted caller access. So in this example, I have got two apps. One app is my employee information app. Again, this is just an example demo. The employee information app has a user record as a reference to it and a start date. So let's take a look at the employee table. So here's an employee table. I've got user with a reference to the sysuser table that part of the platform. And I have a start date to record what's my starting date of employee. And the app that we are trying to design is a vacation calculator or a paid time off calculator. Depending on how many years of service you have within your company, it will tell you how many days time off you get every at the start of every year, or it's just it's really a vacation tracker. So in this particular, I'm in Studio here. I'm in the vacation calculator. Here's my table. All I have is a PTO days field here which shows how many days I have. I've got a user record here with reference to sysuser. And I have a business rule. I have a business rule here, which all it does is it queries the employee information app, gives the reference to the user, and figures out what's the time today minus the start date. And then for this example, I'm just giving out like minimum you have 10 paid time, 10 PTO days, and otherwise if you have more than 4 years, you get 20 days off and like that. So if I go to this application now, so actually before this, I'm trying to read this employee information table. If I pull this up, I get an error up here saying the read operation on the employee table from the scope vacation calculator was denied. the application must declare a cross-group privilege, and it asks me to contact the application administrator of the other app. Now, if I go back to the employee table, the reason I get this error, the reason I get this error, the reason I get this error because the employee information application administrator had set the application access record to be caller restriction. He is allowing access from all application scopes, but he's saying, I want to restrict scopes from calling it unless they explicitly ask me to open the access up for the other app. So this is my, Greg talked about this where we have the caller tracking mode. The caller tracking mode, all this does is it records it, but allows other scopes to access this table. Restriction is it prevents the access unless the admin explicitly grants the access. So now I'm going to go back to the application, the employee application, and you can see here that in the restricted caller access privilege, I see a read operation coming from the vacation app that I'm trying to design. Pull this up. So this is how the restrictor access, caller access form looks like. It gives me what is the source scope, what is the target scope. So here my source was the vacation app that I'm trying to design. The target was the employee app. The target type was a table. It gives the information about which table it is and what type of operation it's trying to do. On the source side, it tells me which was the source. Like business rule gives me the exact business rule that it is coming from and gives me a status here, which is requested, denied, or allowed. So we do allow different types of sources. So these are some of the other source types we allow. So it can track from a business rule, UI action, script include. There's a couple of more here. So let me go ahead and say, let me allow this. So now I've allowed here. If I go back to the vacations app, if I pull this up, then depending on my start date, I get 12 days of vacation. Now, let me go back to the app here. If I change the source type to anything else and try to save it, it automatically blanks out the source. It can't find the reference. If I go back to the application here, get back the same error that I got before. So someone tries to modify it, it won't work. I go back to my employee app, and now I come in here and say I changed the source type to say scope. So what this source type scope allows you to do is grant access to the entire scope, not just the table or not just like a business rule or UI action. This will grant access to the entire scope. I'm going to save this over here. If I go back to my vacation app, pull this up, I can see that I have 12 days of vacation that I can take this year. So in this way, we can, depending on the source type, you can target it to a particular source type, or you can open it up to the entire scope, and it's a little bit more open.
I guess Greg is doing the concluding remarks.
Yeah.
How this all is captured? Is it part of the update set, or it's XML data which we have to move to the production when we or to the next environment?
So your question is, where is this captured? Yeah, so this is part of the metadata. It is part of the application. So if you use update sets or source control, it should be, you would have that metadata saved in that. Yeah.
So for the application, they should get tracked as part of that application. Yeah, so the question was, when you're in tracking mode, since everything's from the point of view of the target application, you have to kind of go through anything that's going to interact with that target application. And if you miss something, then you won't have a record for that. And then therefore, when you go into production, you could have an issue where you have a missing record and users may get an error message. So if you have a huge application, yes, I guess there can be issues with that, and I mean it's one of those things where if you have multiple applications that have multiple kind of dependencies on each other, that that is one of the issues, is that if you don't know where all those interaction points are, then something like that can get missed.
Right, yeah, but part of this, the goal of this was to address like this gentleman's case where he reorganized all the script includes, provided one way to access the functionality of the application, which is the way to go. So then what you would try to do is provide specific ways of accessing this, let's say, script include, right? So you can possibly say this entire scope can access this, or some specific thing from this scope. So this kind of also encourages that kind of design, which is part of the goal of this feature. If you don't have such design restrictions, then you don't need to use the feature. But if the intent of you as an application developer is to have some parts of your application be accessible from other applications, then it gives you control.
Yeah, and then this particular example we chose like an employee information table is because you have certain sensitive data and you want to be able to protect the data within the table and be able to safely allow or reject requests other apps trying to read information from that table. That was another intent.
Hello? I got a quick question. Is there any way you can show us really quick? Does it audit every time the rule is checked? Or does it only audit on fail? And where are the audits kept that you're using these rules? So in case I get asked later, show me what went wrong. Look somewhere and say, it's in this log file.
Okay, so the question is, where is this tracked? So if there's places where an application was trying to call something from another application and it was restricted, there will be records in the restricted caller access table showing that access was requested. So that would be the first place to go to.
Does it show every attempt or just failed attempt?
It won't show every attempt. So if the same business rule, for instance, is accessing a table, it'll only put that record in once. It won't put it in multiple times. So you won't have duplicate records from the same source.
And you were mentioning that these application rules will carry over on update sets. If that's the case, if I sell this item on the store, they automatically have the access when you download them, or do you have to set it up?
So when you have an app from the store,
If I install 2 apps to the store, are supposed to talk to each other. Do I have to go in and make them talk, or because I made it when I developed it, it gets pushed all the way?
Right. So when you install the app, you would have to like trying to.
I'd have to reset the roles up again.
You would have to. So are you talking about the target scope that you might
I'm
install?
talking more from a security standpoint. I can't just be downloading apps that have access to other apps automatically.
right?
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out where you're going with this.
So the record would be generated in the target downloaded app from the store if you try to access it.
Okay, so they have to try to run once, and then it will show up.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Is ACL or this access gets calculated first when the access request is.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So whenever you are accessing the employee record, you should have ACL access provided to you. Then only you can have the real access. And then over the top of this security gate, what we have. So do you know what gets calculated first?
So the application level is checked first, and if the application level says that access is allowed, then any ACL check would then happen afterward. Yeah, one more.
Speaking of, is able to change the process. So would that be just an admin for that particular scoped app, or would a security admin or with admin?
All right, so the question is about who would be able to change the state on the restricted caller access records. And if on the target application administration is turned on, then it would have to be somebody who has that application administrator role. If application administration is not turned on, then yes, it would be somebody with an admin or security admin privileges.
Anybody that's developed an application realizes that accessing global can be some pain. This is great from application to application. I think it's wonderful. You talk about adding a feature like this to get around some of those security restrictions in global.
So the question was about getting with
There's a lot of methods you cannot access. And some of them are
So are you talking about where global is the source application or the target
where
application?
I have a global would be the target application that I want to get data from.
Right. So right now, this feature only works where the target is a scoped application. The source application can be global, but the target application has to be a scoped application right now.
Are you saying, and I'm real quick, is it saying that basically I got to write a script include to be able to call those things from my, that's the best way to do it? There's no other way to access these restricted. For instance, there's date
Yeah,
function.
can you give me an example of?
Yeah, there's a date function. You know how you have date functions and you're looking like what's older than 5 days? Works in global. You try that in a scoped application, that same function. It says no. Security doesn't allow it.
Oh, so okay. So you're talking about the differences in the APIs available in scoped and
Seems
global.
like you've done a lot of work for applications. Weird boundary global. I want to. Is that something being looked at, or is it?
Yeah. So I mean, there are differences in what can be accessed in global and a scoped application. You know, some of this was purposeful because we wanted to try to rationalize certain things in the scoped application development environment, and in order to do that, we had to, kind of take a look at some of the APIs exposed and make sure that they were consistent and made sense. And so there are some things from global that kind of didn't make it into the scoped application environment. So
Seems like this would be.
it's something we can look into. Yeah, that's exactly one of the concerns, is that if there are differences in the way a function is called in global or scoped, yeah, you could run into those inconsistencies if you tried to open things up in the reverse way.
So,
You can take that
so,
one.
so we are going to have global applications, but the scope is still going to be global and the namespace is still going to be global. What it would allow you to do is at least package and manage the new metadata records that you create in the global scope, have a better control over them rather than kind of.
Yeah, so global applications would be more from a packaging point of view than anything else. It's
Right.
so that you can have sort of a similar packaging experience that you have in scoped applications, although it would just be for global.
So my question was around the cross-scope privileges. Do they only work on apps from the same? So like the same instance, two apps we're both the same vendor, but if another company has an app and I have an app, can I have a privilege access?
Yeah, so the cross-scope privilege records are not they're not tied to the vendor code. So you can have, if two application vendors want to have their applications work with each other, then that is possible using the privilege record.
I wish if there can be a dashboard for the system administrator to see which application, privilege record, a summary of all of that, rather than every application having the privilege records on its own. So is there a way where we can have a dashboard kind of thing for all of these?
Yeah, so we don't have a unified reporting at this time. It's been certainly on our roadmap.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for.
Thank you so much.